Welcome to Ando's Thinky Time podcast. Thank you very much for listening. This is a weird episode, I guess. This is me in the bath again. I did an episode a while back in the bathtub. This is like a sequel to the episode. I got a lot of good feedback about it, so hopefully you guys will appreciate this as well. I get pretty open and intimate and a little vulnerable in this episode, so I hope there's some space for that out in the world. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. Come on over to andyepler.com and see the other stuff I'm doing. I'm painting paintings, I'm releasing music, I've got a book, blah blah blah. Come see what I'm up to. I live to entertain you, friend. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. Today is early October. It must be October 3rd. I think that's right. So let's say it's October 3rd, and I have decided that I need to take some time off. I was just working on some liquid light show stuff in my living room. I've decided to pour myself a little glass of Malbec and have myself a bath. So if you hear some dripping and things like that in the background, that's my leaky ass bathtub. Last time I did a podcast while I was taking a bath, I told the first half of a story. I intend to tell the second half now. Tifa's around as well. She has plenty to say today. She has discovered that ever since there's an empty extra bedroom here at the house, she can go in there and meow very loudly, and it resonates through the whole house. We may just hear some of that during this recording. First half of the story was in a previous episode. I believe I called it Story Time, Bath Time. And, ooh, that's tasty. And I told about my experience when I smoked Salvia divinorum back in Texas. Now, I just want to state again during this episode that when I smoked this stuff, it was perfectly legal to purchase. And, I'm sure it wasn't exactly... it was definitely off-label usage. I think they were selling it as like an incense. But if you just put it in your pipe and smoke it, it was actually just concentrated salvia, which is a very powerful hallucinogen. So if you'd like to hear my first, experience with that particular drug, you can listen to that episode. Nowadays, that stuff is illegal, and so I don't recommend that you purchase it or whatever. Don't do anything that's illegal, I guess. And, all right, I think that's enough protecting myself legally from any teenagers that are listening, trying to figure out how to get high or whatever. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't try salvia. And my experience was very potent, and it was so potent that I tried it again the very same night. Let me set the stage view real quickly. I was home alone. That's a mistake. Don't do that. I was sitting in the dark. That's a mistake. Don't do that. And I smoked a large amount of very powerful stuff. The first time I did it, I had this long experience. Not long. It must have lasted a few minutes, but it felt like it was very impactful. And it seemed like it took a long time in my mind, from my perspective. My second experience, I was still trying to understand what I had just experienced, and I couldn't I could not understand what had happened to me. I felt like I had left my body somehow and went to some weird mystical plane. That was very strange. And Tifa was there. And so I tried it again. I took a big hit in this story. And this must have been back in 2008, well, it would have been 2009. So I took a big hit and I held it as long as I could, about 30, 40 seconds, and let it back out. And I immediately must have passed out because there wasn't like a transitional feeling, like, oh, something's happening. There wasn't really much of that. So the next thing that happened to me, I was no longer in my living room. I was still a physical being. I think I was me, essentially. But I suddenly was not in my living room. I pulled my head out of a bubble. Okay? It was a bubble, like a half bubble on the ceiling. A big bubble, like 3 feet, maybe 2 feet wide. And handles on either side of it. And I was standing on like a 3-step ladder. I was on a ladder. I had just pulled my head out of a bubble. And it had handles on either side for me to hold on to when I had my head in there. And I looked around. I kept my hand on the handles. I didn't move really. I had enough wherewithal to kind of look around. And what I found was I was in a long hallway, big long hallway of little step stools and these bubbles. There were bubbles all over the ceiling. They were ordered. They looked like they were in a row. Maybe they were like, maybe it was like 4 bubbles wide, maybe, and then like down the hall, I could see like a turn and it kind of went out of sight. But I must have seen 50, 60 bubbles in there. So this was just in an area, It was like being in a museum, It was like a display in a museum. There were just a bunch of them. But I understood it to be Andy Epler's life. I understood it to be like, as long as my head is in that bubble, I'm going to live the life that is Andy Epler. But that's not the prime reality. Prime reality was what I had just pulled my head back out into. And it was more like being in an arcade or being in a museum. It was not like anything modern that I've seen. It was something different. It was obvious to me that I was putting my head inside like an arcade machine, essentially. And I was playing the role of Andy Epler. And it was a game that other people could play and whatever. And it wasn't a real busy day. I saw like another couple people kind of around, but I couldn't really see them very well. I couldn't like describe them and tell you they're humans or cyborgs or something. I don't know. I couldn't really see. But I did. I pulled my head out of that bubble and I knew that if I walked away, for one, I couldn't read any of the writing that was around me. So I may not be able to find this exact bubble again. And if I had guessed wrong and put my head in a different bubble, thinking I could like go explore and then come back, I discovered that, it was a real good possibility that I'd mistake it for a different bubble and I've got to live some other whole dude's life before I can get closure on Andy Epler's story that I was involved in. And I didn't want to leave my Andy Epler perceived reality. I didn't want to leave the game. Because I had a wife there at the time. I was married back then and I had friends and family, and I felt like I was leaving those people or had the option to leave those people. And that was terrifying to me. I wasn't ready to release, and really go explore the deep realms of reality. Um, the whole experience, didn't last very long. I was afraid. I didn't move my hands from those handles. I looked around. I said, "Oh my God, this is not where I'm from. This universe isn't my universe. And whatever's in this bubble is the world I know." And so I decided to put my head back in the bubble. And I woke up back in my apartment, back in this reality. And it's really tough to explain. I don't really know that this is prime reality. But I do know I chose to come here. I chose to come here. This may not be, I don't know, the realist version of a real world. I guess maybe I should talk more about that. Let me get out of this bath here. All right, I'm back at my desk. So I had that experience. I basically broke reality for myself, essentially. It surprised me to leave my reality like that. And it surprised me even more that the first thing I wanted to do was come back. What a strange thing to have happen. I was purposefully trying to go far out, but when I got there, boy, it it took me by surprise, as you might imagine. And of course it did, of course when your reality gets broken and you have that experience, dude, of course it was uncomfortable and scary, but I didn't perceive that until I was in the moment. And I had never really experienced a psychedelic at that point in my life, So to go from 0 to 60 that quick was unsettling, to say the least. I wouldn't call it a bad experience. It was surprising and unsettling. And the rest of, boy, I'm still thinking about it, but I definitely thought about it that week. I chose to come back. I chose to return to whatever this is. I put my head back in the bubble. What will I do now that I'm back in the bubble, but I've been outside the bubble? I felt like I had a new ability to control my destiny, I guess, is the only way I can think to say that. Because if this isn't real reality, if it's something more like a game or a simulation, that makes me think about it differently than I was thinking about it before, which is just exactly why I was into trying psychedelics. I wanted to think differently. I wanted to have different ideas to work with. Well, that was a different one. And, this was almost 10 years ago. Maybe right at 10 years ago. And it was a big turning point for me. That was before people were really talking very much about simulated realities. I mean, somebody must have been talking about it, but it wasn't part of popular culture like it is now. That idea is popular now. People know about the idea of maybe this is a simulated reality. Back then, that wasn't an idea I was familiar with at all. I loved video games, Morrowind, especially, and, the Elder Scrolls series, especially, I guess. I found them very captivating and good way to, enjoy a story. But then thinking of my own experience in reality that way, it really made me think about the decisions I make in my world and what I'm doing here and what I choose to make of it. I choose to be a peacemaker. I choose to inspire people. I choose to bring joy to people. I choose to express myself and my ideas. If nothing else, so that when I play through this again, maybe I'll play as a different character, and maybe I'll hear one of the songs that Andy Epler made, or a painting by Ando or whatever. Maybe that'll enter my sphere, and I'll be able to sort of pass along information to my next playthrough. Little clues, maybe. I've got to say, if this is a simulated reality, I'm really enjoying my playthrough, because I'm getting to do the stuff I feel strongly about. There's been wonderful parts of the story and terrible parts of the story, and my heart has been so full and my heart has been so crushed. I've really gotten to taste a lot and experience a lot, and I'm grateful for that. And I really love this game, and a couple years ago, more recently, I read a book called the Singularity is Near. And let me actually back up a little bit. I skimmed the fuck out of that book. It is so thick and so tough to get through. Every idea is, to me, very complex and takes a while to get through. And I have to just stop and think, and then read a little more and stop and think. And it's like a Stephen King novel, this motherfucker. Ray Kurzweil is the author. His previous book was called The Age of the Spiritual Machines. That's so fucked. So I'm not talking about artificial intelligence really in this episode, except they're sort of connected. But the idea of a simulated reality is just, it seems like more and more people are thinking about that and talking about that. Or at least I have heard more about it lately. Like over the last 4 years, more people have really, Elon Musk talks about that shit all the time. Ray Kurzweil talks about it a little bit. A lot of people just really are into that idea. And I feel like I've experienced it firsthand, And I don't believe it like it's true. I don't believe it like it's definitely real. I believe it like, isn't this a fun tool to use to view reality through? Isn't this like an interesting, useful way to think of reality? And it is for me. Imagining that the world is a simulation opens my mind up and lets me respond differently to stimulus. When somebody makes me mad, I'm a little less quick to respond with anger, and pass that along, because I feel like somehow, if there's a point to the game, it's to learn to be a better person. It's like an education type game. That, for me, is how it seems. So I choose to learn the lessons, and I choose to play by the rules in some ways, be a human and accept a persona and go by a name and have money and do the, have a house and do the stuff. I choose to live by the basic rules that are set before me how to play the game. But also knowing that it's a game, or feeling that it's a game, is almost like having access to like a cheat code, you know. Are cheat codes even a fucking thing anymore? Not really. Back when video games were first kind of getting going, there were like ways you get infinite lives, you know, or something like that, or bulletproof skin or whatever, and you could, you know, up down, left right, ABA or what the fuck ever, and you know, you get like special treatment within the game, you know. I feel like that Salvia experience was sort of like typing in a cheat code. And some games penalize you for cheating. You get the benefit of the cheat code, but now you can't save your game. Or, you know, you get the benefit of a cheat code, but also like maybe somewhere in the game the challenges are increased. So I felt like maybe when I typed in that cheat code into my brain that day, I felt like after that my life did get harder. You know, money was much more of an issue in the next couple of years, and it was stressful. We moved to Colorado and made big changes in our lives, and it was very stressful, heavy time. And I've acclimated to that level of difficulty, you know, and life's gotten more difficult since. But having those experiences, boy, it helped me reconceptualize what I'm doing here. I'm not just here to have a job and be one of the people at the grocery store and, you know, in the background of the world. That is not what I choose to do. I choose to try and I choose to gain some level of status and influence. And I choose to use that to make the world a nicer place and to help people realize what a beautiful place it already is. And what a mysterious place it is. You know, what a strange place it is. And how strange and beautiful are worthy concepts. You know, I choose that. You know, I love people, and I care very much to make people's lives a little better, you know, by telling them some jokes or giving them a podcast to sort of listen to and some new shit to think about it, you know, while they fucking whatever, work at the, you know, office or, you know, run the fucking vacuum or whatever it is that you're doing now. I choose that. I want to be effective in the world. And in the game, I suppose that means when I'm being my highest self, that's when I'm racking up the points, so to speak. So I'm trying to get, I'm trying to get the high score, you know, for being me. And I think like 2 years ago, I got hip to a show called Rick and Morty. And that's a great show. And, you know, I'm brand new to it, but there was a little throwaway joke in one of the episodes where they're in some futuristic, you know, cafe or what the fuck, arcade kind of deal. And Morty, I guess, like, is playing a game, and it's like, it's called Roy, I think. And Morty sits down and he's playing it, and he lives a whole life, but he gets back out of the game and he's disillusioned, and he's like, oh my God, my wife, my child, where am I? And Rick is like, calm down, you were just playing a game. Oh my God, that was so real, I lived a whole life. And you're like, of course you did, this is Roy, it's a great game, you know, everybody likes it. And then Rick sits down and plays it and fucking does all this fun shit, because Rick knows it's a game, and somehow, like, you know, it's not his first playthrough, you know? So, you know, when Rick goes in to play the game, he sort of like takes Roy off the grid, and, you know, like he's not getting a social security number for Roy, you know? that's sort of the experience that I'm having. I am back in the world. I have chosen to come here, and now I'm sort of playing a different game than I was before, you know? So there you go. There's a story about my Salvia experience and how it relates to how I see the world now. Should I give more disclaimers? Don't do drugs, don't do anything illegal. Oh, this never really happened, and I'm just trying to make people laugh. And also, oh man, just don't ever break the law, ever, for any reason, especially, with regard to your consciousness. The government knows what's best. People like Donald Trump and Mike Pence, they're in charge for a reason, and you should definitely take their advice when they tell you what you should and should not be allowed to have in your consciousness, and ways that you're allowed to think and not allowed to think. And when those guys regulate your perspective of the world in this way, I think you just have to respect that. And if there was ever somebody that you could definitely trust and obey about being a high-level mystic, you can trust guys like Mike Pence and Donald Trump about that shit. So always obey the authority and always be worshipful of our dear leaders. And I can't tell if my sarcasm is coming through. I love you very much. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you didn't, I hope you can keep a secret.